Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.6 tier list. I'm Danox Harrison. Now today's patch is quite item focused and there isn't too many changes to individual champions, which means likely we'll see a slow shift over the patch, whereas for now things will be mostly staying similar. That being said, there are still some changes to go over and I will be discussing the item changes and where they're likely to come in and take effect. Starting off with the top lane, in the God tier we have Cho'Gath, Garen and Malphite, and the S tier we have Volibear, Wukong, Nasus, Urgot, Darius and Gnar. Now the big top lane changes to discuss are the 100 HP to nerf to Stridebreaker. This item still will be strong, but it was overperforming on a range of champions, so it was absolutely a needed nerf to bring it a bit more in line. We did also see some sustain options trimmed down. Ravenous Hunter was nerfed, as was Blade of the Rune King, and Immortal Shield both specifically for melees like Aurelia, Fiora and Gangplank, who are utilising it to make them really hard to deal with as early as one item. Sunfire was also buffed, so it's more of a viable alternative to Chemtank and Gauntlet. It's still champion dependent which one will be best for you, but they are a bit more in line now with each other. Overall, these changes are unlikely to have an immediate visible effect on where champions are placed, but we may see some slight shifts start to emerge over the patch. Camille is suffering a bit from a most recent nerf for Low-ELO, and Kayle is just struggling to hold relevance when there's so many champions that can challenge a pre-6, hence both dropping down. We did see a change to TP with the scaling a bit better into the late game regarding cooldown, and it now no longer gives you a movement speed bonus from home guards, but does give you a movement speed buff still from the teleport itself. Ultimately, this is unlikely to change much. A lot of solo queue top laners aren't even taking TP at the moment due to the strength of combat summoners in finding lane dominance. Now moving on to our highlight picks, first up is Gnar, and he did get a slight nerf to his attack speed on this patch, but he's still doing absolute work in the top lane at all elos. Being able to harass from a distance and then beat out almost any champion in melee range once you hit Mega, make him a hard foe to deal with. Still expect him to be building Stridebreaker despite the nerf, but Gnar is very flexible with itemization, so we could see a switch, but currently it just works so well for him. Allowing an extra gap close to land his ultimate is really powerful, especially in those team fights when you're trying to get onto the squishier backline members. Darius is another one who's been a solid performer for a while, and with Stridebreaker range being extended, it was actually a huge bonus for him. Once Darius is in range, his zone slow and his grab, so having an item that enables him to gap close makes him incredibly threatening. Often we see him running Ghost in lane as due to top being such a long lane. Once you've closed the distance with him, it's very easy to start stacking up your passive and destroying your opponent. Do be cautious though, as Darius is vulnerable to ganks, and oftentimes you'll find yourself having to attempt a 1v2 if you end up over pushing. That being said, Darius is the sort of champion who can pull off a 1v2, so it's important to know your limits. Garen is doing really solid at the moment and honestly is a great go-to if you're not sure what to take in the top lane. Once he's on top of a target, he's capable of shredding them and becomes ridiculously bulky in the mid game thanks to his base stats and his build path. Lots of players are running Ignite to help secure that 100 to 0, and with the true damage from the summoner combined with the true damage from his ultimate and his armor shred and his E, they all combine to make it very difficult to itemize against him even if you're a tank. Moving on to the jungle. In the God tier we have Udyr, Skarner and Hecarim, and in the S tier we have Mundo, Nunu, Rammus, Nocturne, Shaco, Evelynn, Kha'Zix and Elise. The jungle got some nice changes this patch. The base healing on Smite got buffed up, which is a nice help to early game sustain, and we saw the XP from Gromp buffed a decent amount to keep it a viable option in your clears. We saw Lilia and Karthus take some heavy hits in individual nerfs, but these picks aren't really successful in Low-ELO anyway, and so weren't featured on our list last patch and definitely won't be for this patch. The nerf to Ravenous Hunter does also hit AP junglers a decent amount, as most of them relied on this rune to help them sustain in their clear later in the game. It was pretty easy for them to go and clear a camp after getting chunked and rejoin the fight on full HP, and although this will still be a viable strategy, it just won't be as effective. Xin Zhao did see a borderline rework, and it's a bit difficult to scope out where that'll land him, as from what it seems he does now have a significantly extended engage range if you land your W first, but overall it doesn't drastically change how he functions, and other than some added AP ratios, his numbers haven't changed much, so for now we're keeping him where he is, but that could be subject to change. Hecarim has been top tier for a while, and there's been little nerfs here and there that pushed him down from God tier, but a big thing that shifted is the emergence of a new build on the last patch. Chemtank was an item we talked about a lot due to how cheap it became and how great it was for champions like Skarner. Well, Hecarim is now joining in on the fun, and with this item it becomes mega tanky, almost impossible to get away from, and thanks to his passive he's still outputting good damage. He did get a slight nerf to his Q based damage, but he's performing so well on the back of Chemtank he's looking like one of the top junglers and is likely to stay that way for the time being. Ganking longer lanes is particularly effective for Hecarim as he can race behind his targets and knock them back, but with Chemtank this becomes far easier, especially as you have a slow you can utilize as well. Nocturne got some nice buffs a few patches ago and it's taken some time, but he's emerging as a strong option. He has a choice with builds. Your standard lethality is still viable, but a common build high-elo players are going, and one that I think is especially effective in low elo, is to go Stride Breaker into Sterax. You still do crazy amounts of damage to squishy targets, but this allows you to be a little bit more liberal with your paranoias and allows you to dive onto the enemy backline and go to town without getting blown up in a split second. Nocturne is very hard to play against due to that constant threat and pressure for long range engage, and he punishes players who aren't as observant and watching the minimaps, so be sure to utilise that and punish your overextending opponents. Volibear got some nice changes on this patch. His W heal is now 100% effective on jungle monsters, but the bigger change is his E damage to jungle camps is no longer capped as low early. For those not familiar, his E does percentage health damage, and it was capped at 150 with 1 point in E, and it now has a cap of 750, which is 5 times that. Now I will say you're not likely to be fighting something which your E is reaching 750 damage in the early game, but that increased cap definitely helps his clear significantly and puts him in a solid place in lower ranks. His skirmishing is strong, he ganks effectively with the ability to chase down targets, and similar to Hecarim, Chemtank really amplifies what he is looking to do. Moving on to the mid lane, in the god tier we have Kastin and Nivea, and in the S tier we have Diana, Nico, Annie, Malzahar, Fizz, Echo, Katarina and Ahri. Mid lane is where we saw the biggest item changes. First and foremost, Verdant Barrier and Seeker's Arm Guard both got nerfed. Thank you. Those two items were broken and making you super hard to trade with in the early game, and they're still good options, but it's unlikely we'll see you rushing one or both quite as eagerly as we did before. Void Staff got a minor AP boost for 200 extra gold, which is a definite nerf. That mostly came from the fact that Void Staff was already never bad to buy, even against low MR targets, due to how efficient it was. Rabadon's was made 200 gold cheaper, but even with that change, the item still feels hard to place. With so many strong alternatives, 3,600 gold is still expensive for what you get from it, and is likely going to remain as a late game option to round out your build. Liandry's got a change where instead of giving Magic Pen against burning targets, it now gives a percentage damage bonus against targets based on the bonus health. This is likely going to be a buff against bruisers and tanks as well in the mid game, but you'll do less damage to squish your targets, but not by a huge amount. Overall, it's hard to say where this change will land Liandry's, but I expect to see it still being utilised by the champions who use it well. Finally, a big change to Luden's Tempest actually looks really impactful. Dealing ability damage to champions now reduces its cooldown by 0.5 seconds with a max of 6 procs per ability. This is really substantial as champions with dot effects or low cooldowns can proc it far more faster than before. A Malzahar who goes E then R then Q might be able to proc Luden's twice in one combo. It's hard to say exactly how this will pan out and who the big abusers will be, but this definitely is a solid buff and may allow Luden's to start shining above Everfrost, but we will see. Now Nivea has been on top for a huge amount of time and is unlikely to move anytime soon. Tear being such an easy option to pick up means you can spam abilities a lot easier than was historically possible. The short cooldown on Rolter means the consistency is really high, and against short range of melee opponents he's an absolute pain to deal with. And mobile champs in particular have an awful time trying to get close, and should she throw an ult and a wall down, you're likely just going to die to the sustained damage. Wave Glare is also solid, which means you can stall the game until you're ready to take over. Pantheon is just a great example of a mid lane who can end a game incredibly quickly. His kill pressure is high, his roam threat is huge, and if you utilise those you can find yourself 3-0 after 6 minutes and the enemy team looking to FF already. His point and click stun combined with his obnoxious harass makes him a very consistent champion, and although he does start to fall off in the late game, often solo queue is dictated by how the early game goes, and he's still very solid at assassinating squishies and picking off lone targets with his ultimate. Eclipse is a really strong initial item to help his burst, survivability, and offers a little bit of sustain, and the follow-up items you pick up will help make you bulky enough to withstand pressure when you're diving in. Ahri benefited massively from the Everfrost changes. It allows her to layer her charm with the root or vice versa and lock down a target for a really long time, allowing her teammates to follow up and take them down. Her ult is a great tool to set up these picks, and with the amount of ability haste in the game at the moment, you'll get it down to a low cooldown. Cosmic Drive has been a really solid item for her as well, as the movement speed and huge amount of ability haste just plays into making her incredibly mobile and capable of outplaying opponents and finding those critical picks. On to the AD carries. In the god tier we have Tristana, Seraphine and Sivir, and in the S tier we have Jinx, Jhin, Misfortune, Swain, Kai'Sa and Vayne. Now AD hasn't been affected too much on this patch. The big one is Ravenous Hunter being nerfed, which was utilised very effectively by Kai'Sa and Vayne. It's unlikely to stop them from being strong, but it will tone them down a tad in the late game with how much sustain they were able to get essentially for free from their runes. We did also see a change to Immortal Shield Bow, with it now having less lifesteal, and it no longer gives lifesteal on proc, but it does give some attack speed and a bigger shield, so overall this feels like a relatively even trade for AD carries, with some preferring it while some preferring it the way that it was before. Samira got some compensation buffs last patch after her nurse, and initially we didn't think there'd be enough to bring her back to the meta, but over time she started to pick up momentum and is in a decent spot. She's definitely not on the level of what she was on her release, but she's still good at punishing vulnerable and short range bot lanes with the amount of aggression she can offer. Combo her with an aggro support with a knockup and look to challenge your enemies playing Sivir and Ezreal and don't give them a chance to have a free lane. She's definitely not a pick in every situation, but in the right scenario she's incredibly effective once again. Sivir bumped up a lot last week, and there were some great comments on the video talking about her new build, so it made complete sense to highlight it and why she ended up rising to god tier. Her favourite build at the moment is Manamune into Duskblade, and it is just not fun to play into. A big change that facilitated this was that her Q, Boomerang Blade, damage now resets when it returns. So prior to this, if you fired your Q through a bunch of targets, it would do less and less damage as it reduces for each it passes through. That reduction now resets when it bounces back at its max range. She'll be able to do much more consistent damage, and with this new high AD lethality build, you can just chunk out squish your targets, and it's really obnoxious. They can't even hide behind minions effectively. Playing with a support or team with CC is ideal, as once they're locked in place there's no way to escape the pending Boomerang Blade, and it'll likely do enough damage to take them down with a little bit of help. Vayne is in a solid spot at the moment despite being a mechanically difficult champion. She's capable of winning duels effectively and is a firm favourite for players at any elo. With a change to shield bow, I actually think an argument can be made for building this item on her instead of Kraken Slayer. A lot of people love the synergy with Kraken Slayer, but she already has tons of true damage, and one of the opinions that a tier list team had was that it was overkill. Instead, look to bolster your weaker aspects with a huge shield from shield bow. The attack speed when it procs is really valuable as well, and you'll still be shredding any target in front of you, so she'll do so with a lot more personal safety, and your dueling will be incredibly hard to deal with. This build was already a thing on previous patches, although rarer than Kraken Slayer, but I think with 11.16 this will likely become a more common alternative. Finally, on to the supports. In the god tier we have Thresh and Seraphine, in the S tier we have Morgana, Leona, Alistar, Lulu, Zilean, Bard, Nami, Blitzcrank and Rell. Now supports did not see a lot of change. Pyke got some buffs to his Phantom Undertow CD later on, but it's nothing major and doesn't really change the fact that he's just not performing well in the current meta. Shrelia has got a buff with its active CD being reduced, but the item still struggles to find relevance as most engaged champions who love this prefer taking Chem Tank, as the stats on it are just far better for frontliners. We may see it pop up as an alternative, but other than Rakan, I can't think of many champions who would want to take the switch unless in niche scenarios. Nami used to be god tier material when Mandate was firmly the meta pick, and with it being nerfed down, she's managed to stabilise and is still a very solid pick in lower elos. She's still consistent as the sustain is a powerful tool, and with her E she can easily get value from Mandate and allow her AD carry to take over. One of the big things with Nami is although she can always be useful with her healing and slow application, her Q and R are powerful tools that favour good play. Particularly her bubble can be hard to hit on mobile targets, but it's very rewarding when you do so. A low skill floor but a high skill ceiling. Look to pair Nami with longer range AD carries like Jhin, MF and Caitlyn who can harass your opponents in lane. Blitzcrank's been a little bit slipper for a while, and I think the reason for his rise is the strength of AD carries and carries in general at the moment. With such high value targets outputting so much damage, being able to almost guarantee their elimination with a well placed rocket grab is hugely effective. His ult being able to instantly destroy shields is also powerful against Sterix and the newly buffed shield bow. A big aspect of finding success on Blitzcrank is moving around the map, controlling vision and looking for picks to help other lanes than just bot. Remember, a rolling golem gathers no rust. Zilean is actually doing really well right now. Moonstone is really easy for him to proc thanks to his low cooldowns, spammable abilities, and you can follow it up with Chemtech Putrefier to easily allow your allies to apply grievous wounds to the enemy team. Zilean is a bit tricky to play, and laning phase is definitely a vulnerability when playing against engage, but once you get out he's one of the highest value supports. His speed buff helps whether it's for your backline to kite or your frontline to find huge engages, and landing a clutch double bomb can deliver a devastating AoE stun to the enemy team. His ult alone is such a powerful tool and really frustrating to deal with, especially when you're already ahead, as you're getting more value from reviving a fed player. That wraps things up for 11.6. Hope this has been helpful and you feel a bit more clued up on the coming patch. Be sure to subscribe if you want to keep updated with our tier list, and fly on over to Mobalytics.gg to check out the full list in one place.